Oceanus by D.S. Knight.
The Oceanus fell through the void 20 times faster than a bullet. On the grand scale of things, however, she was not a fast ship. She was no warship or private cutter. Oceanus was 1.5 billion tons of cargo hauler. According to her records, she was originally one of the many thousands of ships that had been tasked with the relocation of oceans from one world to the next, before the terraforming initiative had been overhauled and modernized. That was long ago enough that a good portion of her data files had corrupted, rendering information on her past difficult to interpret at best. Over the centuries, she had been refitted, her vast tanks now capable of carrying a range of cargoes, from fuel to grain, and all other manner of luxuries and essentials. It would have been a lie, and a barefaced one at that, to claim that the old girl had aged well. Her prow, once depicting a vast painted fresco of some story long forgotten, was now a geographical history of impact craters and deep canyon-like scars. Officially licensed with the Republic's trade fleet, Oceanus had the right to bear arms, and bear them she did. Point defense towers lined her spine and underbelly, and flak batteries adorned her port and starboard sides. While this was impressive for a trading vessel, in line with trade fleet guidelines, these were defensive weapons and couldn't hold a candle to a naval ship of half her mass. Falling around the Calisius star was routine for the Oceanus and served as the beacon to her crew of 6,000, telling them that their journey was finally coming to an end. Just one more jump gate to traverse and they would be at Odyssey, the Oceanus's registered port. Home. Dala was now into her 9th hour of the night shift, and she was not at all happy about it. Zenith was upon them, and in order to accommodate the traditional pre-Republic celebration of a trading ship crossing the system's halfway point, the ship's lottery had selected a skeleton crew. Dala had drawn the short straw for the first time in her career, ending 15 years of drinking herself blind during the festivities. The command deck, a long yet oddly claustrophobic room full of large, bulky computer consoles and flight chairs, was in gloom. It was the one aspect of the night shift that Dala enjoyed. The darkness gave the screens a relaxing glow and dampened the reflections on the forward windows. There she stood, alone with the eternal night, infinity stretching before her. The only good thing to come of this night, when everyone else was singing and dancing, was this view. She saw it every day, amidst a cacophony of barking higher-ups and computer beeps in her ears, never allowing her to stop and take it all in. The breath caught in her throat, afraid to ruin this perfect moment. She lost herself looking out into the void. It was as if Oceanus had ceased to be the hulking metal behemoth that she was, instead forming nothing more than a transparent membrane around her, letting the pinpricks of light so many miles away engulf her senses while protecting her from the cold dark. She was falling through forever. The Oceanus was close enough to Calisius D to make out some of its moons if you knew what to look for. The 5 biggest shone like gemstones caught in the light, tiny dots in a dance around the orange hue of their gas giant. She didn't know their names and had never before taken an interest, but the impulse to know everything she could about this vista playing out in front of her was as compelling as gravity. What did the sky look like from the surface of these moons? Were there any inhabitants staring up into the sky and marveling at the patterns of the clouds and what lay beyond them? And suppose there were people down there. Had any of them seen their home from the vantage point of the void? Dala turned, half expecting the view to eclipse her completely, and stumbled slightly in surprise at the unnaturally loud thud of her footfall on the deck. She was not adrift in the cosmos. She was on the command deck of a ship, and that ship had hundreds of system charts stored on its hard drives. She didn't have to wonder about the names and inhabitants of those moons suspended in the cold dark. The information was within reach. She stopped in her tracks. That was not a new sound, she was sure of it, but somehow it had faded into the background static of the universe as she had stood basked in contemplation. "What are you?" she said, her thick Odyssean accent making her wince. It was harsh in a way she had never considered before in comparison to the pure beauty of space. Her eyes swept over the stations of the command deck, searching for something out of the ordinary. There it was, at the proximity and detection desk, a little amber light emitting a regular pulse. By trade, Dala was a communications officer, so she was not overly familiar with the readings flashing across the display screen. In fact, they could have been written in Kuzusma for all the sense it made to her. She could see streams of numbers next to half a dozen blips that seemed to be closing into the center of the screen, flashing in tandem with that amber light, a larger blip following them. The gentle bing that had been sounding coincided with a pale green line passing over the display. Dala jumped. She had anticipated the bing this time, but just as soon as the thought of it entered her mind, it had been replaced. The buzzing wasn't stopping, and it was gradually getting louder. Oh! She realized exactly what was happening. She stood frozen for a second, before the situation properly sunk in, and panic pricked her skin.
Sound the alarm. Sound the God's damned alarm.
She turned quickly, desperately calling out, seeking help. But she was alone. There was no one to sound the alarm. Her hands brushed over knobs and buttons, sliders and screens, as she dashed from station to station as fast as her eyes moved from left to right.
Where is it? Where the fuck is it?
The desperation she felt didn't reach her voice for some reason. Her words came out quietly, almost whispered breaths. She knew where the alarm was. Everyone knew where the alarm was. On the XO's station, there was a ship-wide alert button, but despite her words slipping out like silk, her mind was on fire, electrocuted, drowning in panic. This was not her job. This was not something she was supposed to have to handle. She had never been trained for this sort of situation, and wasn't sure if she'd even remember how to press the button if she did ever find it. The buzzing was now a constant, solid sound, punctuated mid-sentence by the proximity klaxon, its obnoxious screeching doing nothing but panicking her more. In less than a minute, the tranquility of the dark command deck had become a nightmare of noise. Red lights along the top of the walls began to flash, slightly out of sync with the obnoxious klaxon. Dala spun the pit of her stomach tightening as she swallowed down bitter bile. In the red, pulsating gloom, the brightness of the alarm switch called to her, not 10 paces away. She took a step forwards, and Oceanus lurched with the violence of an earthquake as each of the 6 torpedoes that had been hurtling towards her found their mark. The ship did not resist. Her weapons stayed quiet. She was old and tired, and overdue a refitting for automatic defenses. One missile detonated against the port side of her prow, adding a new crater to her armored mass. The rest spread evenly along the port side until the last one hit the stern, where 2 of Oceanus's 4 massive main sails erupted with superheated plasma. It vented violently into the vacuum, and on any other day, on any other ship, Dala would have thought the bloom beautiful. It was the 4th torpedo that smashed through the command deck and out of the other side before detonating 100 meters off the starboard side. 1 minute, Dala had been engulfed by the myriad of proximity alarms and panicked thoughts as her outstretched fingers brushed the surface of the ship-wide alarm's safety cover. The next, she was enveloped in cold, hard silence, her skin naked to the touch of nothingness. The tranquility of space was not nothing like the serenity she had felt only moments ago. Her mouth opened a silent scream trying to burst forth from her lungs as she tumbled out of the command deck. Her fingers scrambled over the consoles with renewed desperation as she fought hard to find some form of handhold. Dala's last thoughts were of moons and their names and how she didn't know them. Her last sensation was of her blood, boiling and erupting through her cracking skin.
Thank you for listening. Make sure to like, share and subscribe for more content.